We are back for another session of More Than Mind. And I think we have all, at one point in our life, heard that saying that there is no place like home. There is no place like home. But the feelings that come about when you can't be in your home or you have to create a new home somewhere could bring all kinds of emotions and anxiety and things that you carry with you for years and years and years and years and years. Dr. Shaheem is back to help us peel back this journey that so many people go through. Dr. Shaheem,
Yeah.
hi, good to see you again.
Hi, Shirley June. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. And I'm looking
Good.
forward to this particular topic today. Not only do I
Yes.
know many people
Mm,
who are challenged with this, and
mm,
I can't say I necessarily can understand what they're
mm,
feeling because it's not something that I generally deal with.
mm,
I'm
mm.
also excited to hear that you did your research on this very topic for your PhD.
Yeah, Shirley, exactly. You know what? For us Iranians living in the diaspora, this is all our stories to varying degrees, right? So we have people who migrated perhaps into the United States, Canada, Australia, so many different parts of the world, pre-revolution, perhaps after the revolution, and at different stages in the last 40 somewhat years, we have Iranians who have gone through these experiences. Now, when I was lecturing at the first university, I was teaching psychology in London, I was fascinated by the international student experience. So I would get these incredibly bright, dynamic 18-year-olds. And the first 4 years, I was in awe of their transformation process. So they arrived with a certain cultural identity at 18, and by the time they graduated, there were so many additives and sometimes subtractions to their cultural identity that I found that fascinating. So I started using their journey and reflectively thinking about my own journey of living in these different countries. So I have never lived in Iran. I visited my grandparents in the summers when they were alive, and I have lived in Canada, the United States, the United Arab Emirates, the UK, the Netherlands for a couple of years. And so I feel as if, people sometimes say, I'm neither from here nor there. And I think that's the first mistake we make. You are from all those places. Never put yourself in a state of mind, in the mindset that I'm neither this nor that. No, in fact, you're a hybrid version of both. And there are aspects of both cultures or all three cultures that you have taken on board. And so I started thinking about my journey and all our journeys living in these different countries. I started considering what changes about who we are, what stays the same. And then one of the most interesting aspects of this whole process for me was, Shelley, what happens when these kids go back home? Is home still home? So the repatriation concerns that people experience, because you are no longer the same person. You're no longer looking through the same lenses. Your perceptual lenses about the world has changed. And one of my Emirati students described this beautifully. She said, Dr. Shaheem, my country changes so rapidly and so quickly. And I felt like I went through such great transformation during my time doing my undergraduate and my master's degree, that every time I went back home, I'd have to take a new road to get back home from the airport, because there was new roads and there was new highways that were built. And she said, I often find that as well for my family and friends, they have to find a new road to my heart and mind every
Ooh.
time I come back, because there are aspects of me that have changed, that I'm no longer that same 18-year-old that left.
Mhm.
So being fascinated by this process, I embarked on my PhD research. And
Wow.
I wanted to look at, yeah, what is it? What happens to people when they go live in a host country? What part of our cultural identity changes? What stays the same? And then what are some challenges that we have when we go back home?
Oh. And everybody, I would imagine, whether it is the 18-year-old or the family who's moving for safety reasons, you're a
Mhm.
person that wants to start a new life somewhere, better opportunities, all of their experience is so very unique.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they're very unique and different from one another. So let me describe to you
Okay.
what those different groups are. And they've been identified in research. What's
Oh,
really
okay.
important is that these different groups, we call them the different groups in cultural transition. Okay.
Okay.
And they include people like immigrants.
Okay.
You've got international students, you've got asylum seekers, you've got refugees, and then you've got expatriates, and you also have tourists, right?
Okay.
So these are people who are in cultural transition, but they all have different starting points. So, for example, a tourist goes for leisure,
Yes.
right? They have the money to be able to go to a particular country for a set amount of time. Usually they stay in a hotel with other tourists and they do touristic type things, and they don't really need to immerse themselves too much in the host country. We
Okay.
buy a little bit of knickknacks and souvenirs and we go back home and we share them with our friends and family, but we don't necessarily adapt or adopt any of those
Right.
cultural symbols and structures and so on, right? But when you look at international students and you look at immigrants and refugees, asylum seekers, and expats, they are the ones who stay longer in those locations. And when you stay longer, therefore, the impact on you is deeper, right? From those groups that I've made um, or that I've just named, I think the one most relevant to us would be immigrants.
Okay.
And some of the factors that impact, when you look at different immigrants living in different host countries, you often wonder, why are some people so much better adjusted than others?
Mm-hmm.
Some people, they struggle very much with this notion of feeling like a fish out of water and struggling with that, with the new environment and new locality. Well, to begin with, one of the main factors that sort of decides or has an impact on how you're going to adapt, or to what degree you're going to adapt, is the distance, the cultural distance between your home country and the host country.
Okay.
So if you're going from, let's say, Iran to Turkey, that might have a smaller cultural distance than if you're going from Iran to Japan, for example.
Okay.
So the greater the cultural distance, the greater the adjustment. The second point is the amount of past travel experiences you've had. Have you lived anywhere else ever in your life? Or is this the first time that you're actually leaving your home country and living somewhere else? So as you can imagine, with the least amount of cultural sort of travel experience that you've had, then the harder it's likely that you're to adjust. The third point, and perhaps one of the most important points that came up in my research, is language skills,
Oh,
Shali. Language skills. My goodness. I mean, one of my khales, I have an aunt in California. She's been there for 45 years and she still can't order a pizza. Bless her.
oh,
Nemi tune. She just was not interested. She was amongst the people who had her bags packed in another room,
oh,
suitcases ready because Engalab is going to finish and everyone is going to go back
go home.
and
Oh,
go home. And she never thought it was necessary to really assimilate or enculturate herself, and so she didn't learn the language. And I know that sometimes for immigrants it can get very frustrating. Before you get your citizenship or your permanent residency, there's a requirement from host countries that you learn the language, that you're able to learn the language. Look, I can tell you from a psychological perspective, that's not as much for those countries as it is for you. It really is. When you learn the language of a host country, that is a window into their culture. If you don't learn that language, it's like a whole chunk of who these people are, what they're about, is left out of your immigration and of your host country experience. So very, very important to learn the language. Second, and the fourth point is your socioeconomic background. Of course, the people who are not as financially well off might have a more difficult time, and your motivation for moving. So, were you forced into the host country, or did you choose to go into the host country? And the less choice we have, Shali, the harder it is to kind of reconcile the fact that we are now in this place that we don't want to be. And that can make it harder to adapt. Okay, so go ahead.
I was born and raised in California. And
Yeah.
last time I went to Iran was just a visit. I was 4 years old. I haven't been back to Iran ever since. When you talk about these people and the challenges here in Southern California, it's like a bag of Skittles of what you just mentioned. From my husband, who left at a very young age because of the revolution and wanting to have a better life here, to my parents, my dad, who wanted to come just to study and be able to have an opportunity to make a life. Then brought my mom here, revolution. Dr. Shaheem, I could go down the list of the hundreds and thousands of people I know in this area that their stories are all over the place about why they left and their decision to come here. Having said that, each one of them, I can also tell you, have adapted in a very different way. There are people who ran with it, built something with it, immersed in it, they're successful in it, they're grounded, they're psychologically healthy. And then there are people on the complete other side of the pendulum. They didn't do anything, they're depressed, they're sad, they're homesick. And there's so many different stories. I mean, how do you even address that? How do you help guide people when there's so many different outcomes?
Well, let me try and identify that continuum for you, okay? On one end, we have integration, which is the best possible outcome of migration and adaptation. On the other end of that continuum, we have separation, okay? And so what does integration mean? Integration means when you arrive at a host culture with your family, you might be born there. But these are individuals who hang on to aspects of their home country, cultural attitudes, structures, norms, and so on, but they also embrace the host cultural values.
Okay.
So it's a delicate balance of being able to integrate, but at the same time, because remember, think about the difficulties that we all faced of between our public lives and our private lives, right? So our private lives may have been very Iranian. The rules, regulations, norms, traditions, expectations from our parents were seeped in tradition and in our culture. Whereas we had to go out there in society and negotiate a different cultural identity to be able to adapt in our host country. In that host country, right? So the people who are able to engage in this nice balancing act of hanging on to their host country, their home country cultural values, but also adopting and adapting to the host country. So we're adapting to the host country, but we're hanging on to the home country cultural values. That is the best possible outcome. And the researcher who's done lots of work on this is Barry. He talks about this acculturation model. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, who are the people who are psychologically worse off, Shali, is that they have now developed a resentment and hate towards their home country.
Oh, yes.
And they can't embrace and adopt successfully in the host country either. So there's this limbo hybrid space of negativity and pessimism of, I hate my country because of all that it stands for, and it abandoned me. It's almost a psychological orphaned state from nation. And that this my adopted country, I don't feel accepted either, because I'm not making an effort, frankly, to understand them and to integrate myself within the value system of this host country, right? So we are not passive observers in this process. How successfully you adapt, how successfully your children adapt, very much depends on how you conduct yourself when you move to another country. And to be mindful, was I forced to go there? Did I choose to go there? And how do I change my mindset from thinking I have lost my country to really switching that mindset and understanding and acknowledging that in fact I have now regained, or I have gained a new home, and adding that on to the countries in which I feel a sense of attachment to, right? And what could I do to fit better into this host country? What are some of the decisions I could make for example, it's good to have friends from your home country, but you also need some friends from the host country. Yes, it's good to eat your food from your home country, but why don't you try some of the food that is present and available in the host country? Why not engage and get yourself involved in some of the activities that exist in the host country? Or else you're always going to feel like a bit of an outsider. And right. And for our Persian and our Farsi viewers and friends, there's an incredible cultural variable at play here. The concept of qurbat. I live in, there isn't a word in English for it. And qurbat means living outside of your beloved motherland. To qurbat zindagi mikoni. So there's a lot of nostalgia and romanticism associated with this idea of that you're not in the motherland, and therefore you should be sad, and and you should feel anxious and down, and as if you're deprived in some way when you're living in Ghurbat, or you're living far away. And so that doesn't help people from our culture to adjust. You see, our poetry, our songs, our movies very much demonstrate the same kind of, or they perpetuate this idea that if you're living outside of your home country, that you're not able to be happy or as well adjusted. You and I both know individuals who have become prominent members of their host country cultures. I'm so proud of Iranians because worldwide we're known as the silent minorities. We get educated and we achieve and we succeed, and we are very good at integrating, in hanging on to our home country values, but as well as adopting to our host country values, sometimes a little bit too good, Shali, right? So we know
that's
people
possible.
who, yeah, because like individuals who have been in the United States for about 5 months to a year and they forget how to speak Farsi. I'm not sure how that works, but that, remember, it's not good on that spectrum to be on either extreme. It's more productive to be able to balance the two. But I think that this is a subject that has many layers to it, and that I think what we've kind of been able to do within this discussion is to scrape the first layers of how important it is to kind of consolidate your home country values with your host country values, rather than rejecting or abandoning either one. And the importance of understanding that your attachment to the host country can be as healthy and as productive as that to your home country. So it is possible.
We definitely have to put another session on this to peel this back even more, because this can't be done in just one session. And I know our time is limited. Before we wrap this up, for anybody who is watching or listening to this right now, Dr. Shaheem, to me on the outside, I would say, for someone who, I live in my home country and I have not experienced most of the challenges, even though I often wonder what it would be like to go home to Iran and look at all kinds of people who look just like me, to know where I come from. I would say, it's just a perspective. Like, just switch it. Like, just dump yourself into the new country and just go for it. Is it as easy as that for people who are watching right now? Is it just a mental conversation with yourself or is it very complex, that there are reasons people hold back and there are people who dive right in?
Look, it has everything to do with attachment. Homesickness has everything to do with attachment, right? When we feel homesick, we're feeling insecure or uncomfortable with where we are physically and emotionally. And we're longing for something that in our minds is known, is predictable, is consistent, and is stable. So it has nothing to do with where you are.
Okay.
The part that I agree with you completely is, stop blaming that place. It is up here that you're craving for what is familiar and stable. And when we're feeling nostalgic about our home country, what the brain tends to do is fool us and only remind us of all that was beautiful and fantastic and wonderful. And we kind of forget about why we left to begin with, right?
Yes.
So that we kind of remind ourselves, it's important to remind ourselves of those limitations and think about all that we have gained. And remember, it's only when you throw yourself into the water, right, and into the ecology, and that you're able to immerse yourself in that experience, that it can become familiar, consistent, stable, and recognizable. Otherwise, you're always watching from behind the window. And that's not a place to live or to extract fulfillment from. You need to open the window, let the fresh air in, open the front door, go and dance in the garden, go and explore the environment, and become one with where you are. And you're able to then understand this sort of newly formed cultural identity that you have, which is a beautiful mosaic of your home country and of your host country.
I think this is where we put a comma at the end of this sentence, because we need to come back and do another session for sure to continue this conversation, because this is a big one that has affected so many people.
Agreed. Absolutely. With pleasure, Shali, with pleasure. And take care of yourself. I hope that you have a great week. And thank you for everyone. We are grateful for all your comments, for your messages, for your presence, for your participation, for your feedback and your suggestions for future segments. I'd like to just take a moment to say that we really honor you. And it is because of you that Shali and I are on this mission, not only to raise awareness about mental health, but to raise acceptance about all these different topics that we talk about.
I love it. So incredibly grateful for your time, Dr. Shaheem.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.